There's a problem in this country. No, not those problems. The problem is the Tories keep on winning elections, and they're not even getting a majority of the actual votes cast. Outrageous, I know. If most of the country doesn't like this particular party, how come they keep on getting almost 100% of the effective political power? Well, for one, the system we use to allocate seats favours the largest party. Well, the largest two parties and those with strong regional votes, but we might get to that a bit later. And whatever else you might say about the Tory party, it does win the most votes in England, at least, which is where most of the seats are, and well, go figure the rest out, right? The other way they keep getting this disproportionate political power is the votes of the party who are opposed to them are distributed in a way that allows them to win many seats without a majority of the votes cast. So what if all of these parties, who had a broad agreement on the fact that the Tories are lowlives who need to be removed from office, decided to form an alliance? Well, what if that? I guess that's what this video is going to be about, and we're going to try and see and predict what might happen in that case. In this video, if I've done my job properly, you will know what exactly the Progressive Alliance is, why some people want them, how various electoral alliances form and work in practice, and whether the Progressive part is ever actually a serious part of them. I'll then dedicate an entire section of this video to explain to you why it just doesn't work, won't work, can't work, whatever, take whichever one you want, and also why it really shouldn't be something anyone on the left should consider at all, at all. Now, if you're an FBPE lib-brained type, this is the time to cry about how mean I am and how I'm enabling the Tories because of my purity politics, when you all wouldn't take yes for an answer in 2019 for your precious EU referendum. Are we done? Alright, let's start.
Progressive alliances and why some want them.
To get this very first bit out of the way quickly, a progressive alliance in the UK refers to an electoral alliance between nominally left of centre, or well really left of Tory, parties in the UK that sometimes includes the pro-independence parties in Wales and Scotland, though the Progressive Alliance is typically more inclusive of Plaid Cymru than the SNP. That is kind of explained by these two maps, I'll put them up either side of me, that give you a pretty clear view as to why that might be the case. Now, no one who's taking the idea of a Progressive Alliance seriously is doing it for the vibes. At least I like to think they're not doing it for the vibes, although a lot of politics these days is just politics by vibes. It's an attempt to solve the problem I was describing in the introduction, namely that first past the post, which is the electoral system in the United Kingdom, favours the largest party disproportionately, which you can see here in the 2015 seat distribution. On the face of it, it looks unfair, right? How does 36.8% of the vote entitle you to 100% of the power, provided your party doesn't face any serious internal discipline issues, which in the UK, in the parliamentary system that we have, are very rare. Even the most rebellious MP votes with their party at least 92% of the time. The other problem that's trying to be solved here is, well, apparently there's a progressive majority in the UK. You can probably tell from the tone of my voice that I have my doubts about the term progressive and whether there is actually an electoral majority for those sorts of ideas, but I'm going to take the Progressive Alliance advocates at their word, which is maybe my mistake, but for the sake of the exercise, let's just do it. So the problem is that while there's a significant block of votes for progressive parties, those votes are split in various seats across the country in a specific way that allows the Conservative Party to win majorities, or in the case of 2017, a very strong plurality of the seats. So why not simply have a single progressive candidate against a Tory? There's also the much more plain issue, which is that the Conservative Party fucking sucks. They fucking suck, alright? I'm not gonna fucking sugarcoat it. They're shit at governing, and the occasions on which they choose to be effective at governing, it's usually to turn the racism dial up, screw over young people because their electorate primarily consists of home-owning pensioners, or undermine the already very fragile set of checks and balances in the UK Yes, I know the UK has always been like this, but I need to present the arguments that these people make so that we can shit on them later, so just stick with me. Stick with me, everyone. As I discussed in the STEM Brain video, there can be multiple equally valid solutions to a problem. So in this case, the Labour Party should simply beat the Tories is a valid solution, but let's be honest, if it was going to happen at any point in the past decade, 2017 was probably when it was going to happen, before Brexit and hard Remain came along, often pushed, by the way, by the same people who are behind these pushes for a progressive alliance. So we're left with a variety of equally unlikely plans, like the Lib Dems simply beating the Tories, or, here's an idea, we can simply find a way to add all of the votes from the progressive parties together in seats where it matters and agree to some kind of coalition government after to implement some form of proportional representation so that this problem doesn't appear again. Again, I'm probably not hiding my skepticism very well, but this is broadly what the plan seems to be. You can see an example of someone who really believes in this idea of simply adding the votes together in the form of EU flag fucker and political airhead Femi.
Again, a clear progressive majority, and that's even without the SNP. Anyone on the right who celebrates this poll, and anyone on the left who complains about this poll, you're bad at democracy.
Well, he's right if his idea is to simply stack the votes of these parties. It does add up to a majority, but is it so simple? I'm not so sure. I also really like the idea that people can be bad at democracy. Like, what the fuck does that actually mean? People are allowed to react how they want, and I personally thought it was very funny in the middle of what was some pretty negative press for the Conservative Party that Labour managed to record that little -2 next to their name. I thought that was funny. I don't know. Yeah, their numbers have picked up recently. I wouldn't count on it lasting. There are some other reasons why I think the Progressive Alliance is pursued by some people. While there are about 4 or 5 different specific major visions for a Progressive Alliance, one thing they tend to have in common is, as I said earlier, is that the government that's brought in as a result of a Progressive Alliance should bring in some kind of proportional representation. Now, obviously, proportional representation benefits some parties more than others, which is perhaps why they're pushing it, right? That makes sense, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with these minor parties acting in their interest, assuming this alliance is going to be a kind of, give and take deal where people get things that they actually want. There's also the obvious motivator under any electoral system for an alliance. They just simply want more seats. That's it. They just want more seats. It's opportunism for sure, but hey, that's the game, I guess. There's also a barely disguised tendency in the Progressive Alliance, which is why I suspect a lot of people actually support the Progressive Alliance. It acts as a bulwark against the left, or at least it would if the left were a significant element in electoral politics, which maybe they are. I mean, you'd think so given the amount of crying about tweets that are calling the ham man Keith. I mean, do you really think a coalition that includes a party led by a man who's openly admitted he's a liar and willing to lie, another led by a man who was in a Tory cabinet, and another party that lost its mind over membership of the European Union is really going to do anything worthwhile or aligned with left goals? Never mind that, but I find demands like this, I don't know where it's going to go, but it'll go somewhere, from the aforementioned Femi rather convenient now that there's no mainstream left-wing electoral party that has a shot at winning seats, and that the largest nominally left-of-centre party is now in the hands of people who will use the full force of the party's bureaucracy to remove any leftist in sight. I just find it interesting that suddenly competition is bad in electoral contests when it was essential before because the bastard man Jermoy Krobnoy was leader of the party. Also, let's not forget the Scotland-sized elephant in the room, because this heavily implies that in Scotland, more or less everyone is going to be getting out of the SNP's way, which will be big news for Scottish Labour and the Scottish Lib Dems. Not that they're particularly effective parties, but I'm not going to open the Scott poll tin on this video. To give an example of this sort of attitude about a progressive alliance, check out this tweet reacting to the news that a left-wing trade union, in this case Unite, was reducing their funding to the Labour Party and what this person thinks it might mean for a progressive alliance.
Unite's cut of funds to the Labour Party may be a silver lining for those of us who, above all else, want the Tories out. With Labour running short of funds, Starmer may have no option but to support a progressive alliance to seek some kind of win for him at the next general election.
It's an interesting reaction to what might be seen as an attempt to apply some left-wing pressure to the largest nominally left-of-centre party in the country, and it doesn't really recognise something about first past the post, which is explained very good in that really good CGP Grey video. First past the post tends towards two major parties, and inevitably, in most seats in a given country, the two parties in contention are those two same major national parties. So even if their funds are squeezed, I think they might still fancy rolling the dice on going it alone. But I'll get to that a little bit later and how that might apply to the Tories as well. Progressive alliances are also something of a shortcut for minor parties. And look, I like to be lazy too. You'll probably see that in the editing of this video. But if you're a political party looking for one weird trick, probably isn't the right way to do it, even if it's a task as difficult as supplanting an opposition party in a first-past-the-post democracy. I get it. It's easier than movement building, and given the political position of both the Greens and the Lib Dems, who are probably the major parties that will also be involved in a progressive alliance, and their recent history, I can see why they would want one weird trick rather than more than a little bit of hard work. So that's the theory, but has this ever been tried before? And if it has, how did it play out? Let's find out.
Progressive alliances in practice.
One thing I want to be clear about is that electoral alliances aren't something new or special or even confined to the UK. In fact, if you believe some people, we already had a progressive alliance, and for that we go to a man who's just so important to me, Mike Gapes.
I see talk of a progressive alliance. Well, we had one. The Broad Church centre-left Labour Party under Tony Blair of 1997, 2001 and 2005. Milk.
I won't be litigating exactly what this progressive alliance got up to, but suffice to say that I have some thoughts about why war crimes and failing to overturn neoliberalism are bad, actually. Nonetheless, this is a very real attitude that exists, that there's already a progressive alliance and it's the Labour Party. And to be clear, this is not the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. And really, I just wanted to let Mike Gapes have his say in this video. Also, Labour is shit. Worse shit into 1997 to 2010 and are still shit now. But look out for a future video on that and the so-called lesser evil. With the recent focus in the UK on things like corruption, as if we hadn't been swimming in an ocean of it before Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, there were suggestions in the North Shropshire by-election, which will have happened by the time the video has been released, but hasn't happened as of recording, that a single anti-sleaze candidate could be endorsed by the opposition parties who would likely be making up this progressive alliance. The opportunity in this case was declined by those parties, and again, as of recording, we will see whether that pays off for any one of them. But this was a clear callback to Martin Bell, the so-called man in the white suit. He was the candidate in the traditionally Conservative seat of Tatton, and proceeded to absolutely batter the incumbent Tory MP, as we can see from the result which will appear on the screen in some form at some point. I also want to say a special shout out to the Juice Party. I have no idea what that is, but it sounds like it deserved exactly 73 votes, no more, no less. Wow, I don't tell me about what their actual politics are in the comments, please. Just let me have this, alright everyone? Let me have it, it's funny, alright? Now, I'm not going to say the desire for an anti-sleaze candidate is just people engaging in cargo cult style antics to try to replicate an election result that happened as of the recording over 24 years ago. For context, I was free when that election result happened. Look at me now. I was fucking free when that happened, right? However, it's hard to deny that the logic at play is something that we see in the Progressive Alliance demands that a single anti-Tory candidate is clearly the best place to remove the Tory in a given seat. Of course, it's worth thinking about what kind of politician we get from anti-sleaze politics, and whether we might end up with a similar caliber as a result of indulging this same hypothetical with Progressive Alliance types. I'll be referencing my friend and punished proofreader Mick Wright's article on Martin Bell here for a couple of excerpts, but I'm going to link to the whole article in the description below. I highly recommend it, but here are the excerpts.
Bell, who spoke infrequently in Parliament and mostly confined himself to issues of foreign policy when he did, usually voted in line with the Labour government. But when it came to the repeal of the virulently homophobic Section 28, he went through the lobbies with the Conservatives, attempting to prevent its abolition. He also voted against the fox hunting ban. Outside of his parliamentary activities, Bell backed a campaign for the release of Mark Wright and James Fisher, who, in September 1992, while serving in the Scots Guards, murdered 18-year-old Peter McBride by shooting him in the back as he was running away after being searched by the soldiers and found to be carrying no weapons. As he lay dying, they shot him again.
Yeah, not exactly a resounding endorsement for pre-arranging an electoral alliance that backs a single candidate if this is the quality we can expect. That's all interesting, but as I said before, it was happening at a time when I was 3 years old, so it's not exactly super relevant to the recent argument. So let's fast forward to 2016. I'm 22 years old, I was finishing up my master's degree, I was probably a bit thinner, though apparently this was the subject of some dispute during the proofreading period. But I'm not mad about it, okay? And the UK had just voted to leave the European Union. It just so happened that all of the parties that would make up a hypothetical progressive alliance campaigned for remaining in the EU, and the reaction of the smaller parties was more or less, holy shit, this sucks. The electorate are such dipshits. I will say that if you recall, one of the main issues that the Progressive Alliance attempts to highlight is that the votes of all of the opposition parties outnumber that of the governing party. That doesn't apply to Brexit because, for better or worse, 52% of the voting electorate voted for it. An actual majority. Like, that is an actual majority. I don't know how else to describe that. But this isn't a video about Brexit or its aftermath, so why am I bringing it up? I'm bringing it up because for the next 3 years, and to be honest, beyond the next 3 years after 2016, and it's fucking non-stop exhaustion, there were groups who wanted to reverse the referendum. And the question was, well, how do you really do that, right? You really have a few options. One, you simply vote in Parliament to stop it, which, given the parliamentary arithmetic between 2016 and 2019, it wasn't happening. Two, somehow get a second referendum to happen would remain on the ballot. Again, the parliamentary arithmetic didn't quite work out there. Or three, have an election that results in a majority in Parliament for either of these options. A plan was hatched. What if all of these parties opposed to Brexit never shut the fuck up about how bad it was and tried to create one of those three outcomes? Now, after the 2017 election, because of a catastrophic failure to understand which number is bigger than the other, something called the People's Vote campaign appeared again and again. And look, again, I'm going to stress this. This is not a video where I go into the whole Brexit thing. Other people have done it much better than me. All of this came to a head in 2019 when dancing ghoul and architect of the hostile environment Theresa May suffered defeat after defeat, which resulted in her eventual resignation and replacement by bumbling dipshit and author of one of the most racist books I've ever read, Boris Johnson. Now, Boris Johnson ended up kicking out a whole bunch of his party's MPs for their refusal to vote along his party's line on Brexit, which maybe I'm envious of, in a way. But this led to an idea. What if we could go back to option number 2? You remember option number 2? I'm going to put it back up on the screen somewhere. Now that the parliamentary arithmetic has changed, surely now that they've been freed from the Tory party, the good Tories will come to our rescue. Now, it turned out that the good Tories were a recurring sort of liberal mirage that kept appearing, and they kept on invoking them and constantly were surprised when they just were normal Tories and did the things that Tories do. Then came the most tedious idea I'd ever heard, which you will recall, given what I do all the time, is an impressive thing to have achieved. The idea was, what if we formed a government of national unity, or a national unity government? It was some fucking combination of these words. Now, this in effect is a progressive alliance, because it would have included all of the progressive, nominally left of Tory parties, whose general position, I had to get my hair out of my face there, but whose general position was critical of Brexit, ranging all the way from simply wanting to cancel it, but realising you may need some democratic legitimacy to do that, all the way to, we could make some kind of Brexit that functions in some way, maybe, and it'll be alright. It would also have to include the Tories who were removed from their party for breaking the Tory whip. These negotiations went on for a while, but they kept coming back to a single issue. The Lib Dems in particular wanted to be able to choose who the leader of the largest opposition party was, or asked them to step aside for an independent Prime Minister. Now, there are two things going on here that I want to say. One is, if the Lib Dems want to pick who the leader of the largest opposition party is, they should simply become the largest opposition party. And the other thing is to point out that the name that was most commonly floated was Ken Clarke, who, I will note, was more supportive of the idea that the leader of the largest opposition party should be the leader of this government of national unity than the supposedly progressive Lib Dems. As expected, the government of national unity idea fell through, but not before we got some amazing insights into the minds of liberals, such as this from Green MP Caroline Lucas, where she advocated for an all-white women's cabinet to prevent Brexit with a no deal. I can't even. Let's hear what she had to say, what the idea may have been.
Lucas, who is understood to have begun talks with the women she has addressed in her open letter, sent the offer to Thornbury, Swinson, Greening and Sturgeon, as well as the Change UK MP Anna Soubry, the Independent MP Heidi Allen, the SNP's Kirsty Blackman, the Independent Northern Irish MP Sylvia Herman and Plaid Cymru's Liz Saville-Roberts. The final MP who has been approached is Yvette Cooper, one of the leading Labour figures coordinating efforts to stop no deal, but the only one of the addressees who has not explicitly endorsed a second referendum herself.
The main advocates for a government of national unity and the progressive alliance that had formed in the wake of Brexit, which described itself as an anti-Brexit alliance, which I will note that a majority of the electorate voted for, did face an electoral test while it was acting as an electoral alliance against both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, which at that time was led from the left. They all decided to form a joint candidate in opposition to both parties in Brecon and Radnorshire, which had a by-election, and, to be entirely fair to them, they won the seat. Let's look at the numbers. Of course, it's interesting to look at the numbers for the Tories, the Brexit Party and UKIP, and whether those would add up to 50%, but that's what came next. But before we get there, let's rewind a little bit. This post-Brexit progressive alliance had existed in an informal capacity quite a bit before this by-election, a combination of Parliament preventing Theresa May's Brexit deal from passing, and a People's Vote movement that, well, was doing shit like this, and a general sense that Brexit may legitimately be imperiled by this alliance between the anti-Brexit parties, who, as my friend Ponderful notes in her video on the topic, weren't really doing anything that would suggest they were trying to prevent Brexit. Now, it may be the case that there is a majority, or was a majority in this country, for progressive, vague progressive agendas and so on, but you know what we know for certain commanded a majority among the electorate? Brexit. In fact, let's look at how the progressive alliance against the left, as I like to call them, that went into the 2019 election and the informal regressive alliance fared against each other in that same seat. Yeah, that went well. The Regressive Party won a majority, so no one can really blame Labour or the monster raving loonies for the result here. Not that anyone was particularly inclined to blame them, I'm sure. And not that these voters would necessarily have voted Lib Dem anyway, but we'll talk about that in a bit. This goes to show something though, which is that any manoeuvring towards a progressive alliance is open to a regressive backlash. Now that's not a reason not to do something, to be clear. But given recent elections in the UK, and the general press atmosphere, and the damp ham who currently leads the opposition by trying to outflank the regressive parties to their right, I'm just not convinced of there being an electoral progressive majority. There's a common thing done to justify progressive alliances, which is that in other countries, electoral alliances exist. Parties coexist in coalition and confidence and supply arrangements, sometimes pre-agreed before elections, so why can't we do that here? No reason in principle. Let's look at an article by cephalopod and aging smoking chimp impersonator Nick Cohen. And this is the question that he asked. And it's not a bad question, right? I'll be going into why it won't happen in the next section, but let's look at the alliances he cites.
In Turkey, Hungary and Israel, opposition parties had shown that protecting democracy from strongman leaders was more important than ideological divisions. The UK centre-left did not want its country to become a one-party state either, and decided to put just one opposition candidate against the Tories in each seat.
There's a couple of things here that are worth noting. Firstly, these alliances were formed primarily to either oppose a specific figure, or to protect democracy, or to do some combination of both, which is interesting given some of the parties involved in these alliances. It's a shallow form of politics, and purely opportunistic, unlike, say, the Social Democratic-led coalition government in Portugal. They don't have an overarching project beyond keeping the bastard man of their particular country out of power, be it Netanyahu, Erdogan or Orban. I'll speak about the Turkish opposition alliance, which ranges from centre-left-ish secularist party to a party commonly regarded as far-right and very much the opposite of secular. So unless we're now saying that the Saadet Party are progressive, I'm not sure how this tracks without inviting, say, the Reform Party in. In fact, let's look at what they say about Hungary's opposition alliance, and note the description of one party in particular.
In Hungary, the united opposition against Viktor Orban's corrupt control of the state and media runs from the Greens and the Socialists through to the formerly neo-Nazi Jobbik Party, which is now a Hungarian version of UKIP. Your enemy's enemy is your friend when the future of the democratic system is in the balance. What the fuck is this, man?
Oh, so we're all for forgiving neo-Nazi parties who are just like UKIP, a famously normal and fine political party. Let's see where we'll put the headline for that one. Yeah, that's a real headline, not a shitpost. All of this is kind of moot though, because the truth is that a progressive alliance is, well, unlikely, and so unlikely, I'm going to say it won't happen. And it doesn't work as a concept, and it's just bad.
Why it won't happen, won't work, and is bad.
I've not made it a secret throughout this video that I think the progressive alliance is a load of shit. I could just leave it at that, to be honest, and call this a video well done, but as a special treat for you, I can go over all of the key reasons why I don't think this is an idea with any viability. Firstly, plain party interest will prevent it from working. This isn't a video about first past the post, but it is the system under which seats at Westminster are distributed. So let's suppose you want to construct this alliance. It will almost certainly include the Labour Party in the ideal form of this alliance, especially now it's been rendered unthreatening to the interests of the piss Tory party's voter base. Sorry, they make me so mad I can't even finish the phrase correctly. The reality is, in an overwhelming majority of seats, the top two parties are Labour and the Tories. That has two effects that are relevant here. One, any alliance that includes Labour will probably move them into getting a majority if it works, meaning they have no obligation beyond honouring their word to govern with the Progressive Alliance. 2. It makes any deal where the smaller parties are allowed clear runs in seats very difficult to justify on the kind of scale that would ensure a hung parliament to prevent point 1 from happening. Take the example of the Green Party. They currently hold 1 seat in the Commons. Stands to reason that Caroline Lucas would probably be given a clear run in her seat, or Labour just wouldn't try very hard against her. There are only 2 other seats in the country where they've come second. Now, if the winning party were the Tories, that would more or less be that, and they could easily chalk up a couple of gains, at least under the model of the Progressive Alliance. But the problem is that the winning party in both of those seats are Labour. So what do? The Greens don't have much in the way of options for seats they can win outside of those seats, and Labour wouldn't really ask an incumbent to step aside for another party. So you can see how there's no real negotiation to be had here that can work given the reasonable motivations in the case of those 2 parties. Let's think a little bit about why it won't work, even if that kind of obstacle can be overcome. I will concede the point that for various left of Tory parties, their voters would probably prefer the non-Tory option in a 2-way race. Hard not to when the Tories are such obvious pieces of shit. The problem is, these Progressive Alliance concepts usually rely on perfect transferring of votes between the parties involved. Now, if this was, say, 90% effective, or even 80% effective, I might look at it and go, yeah, fair enough, it's not perfect, but what is? This is where the issue of the various parties' different bases and different historical roles come into play. Take the Lib Dems. It's hard to believe now, but they used to have a very strong regional vote in the southwest of England. Who did those seats go to? Mostly the Tories. The role of the Lib Dems has by and large been to hoover up soft Tory voters who simply will not vote Labour, so creating a strategy that relies on those voters putting an X next to the name of a Labour candidate, or even a Green, seems like a long shot to me. Setting aside whether it's good or bad for options in a democratic system to be curtailed like this by a backroom deal done by politicians, it's bad. It's obviously bad. But anyway, artificially curtailing people's options at elections probably won't endear you to them. Generally speaking, the dynamics of first past the post are well understood by people, partially because it's so simple. The kind of person who's voting for a minor party in a given seat knows what the effect of that is, so why not allow them to make that decision? Here's the thing. I would never vote for the Liberal Democrats. They're a party I regard, frankly, as Tory scum. I've said so on this channel before, and I'm not alone in that opinion. Equally, there are Lib Dem voters who will never vote Labour. Fair enough. I wouldn't particularly want to either at the moment, so why shouldn't I, or voters who have those views, be represented on the ballot? I guess I could just not vote, which suits me just fine, but for a political project ostensibly aimed at defending democracy, reducing choice, and probably reducing participation, seems like an odd way to go about it. When I mentioned that there are people who would never consider backing fellow progressive parties, that hinted at one of the big problems, the contradictions of such an alliance. Let's take it at its most narrow and compare it to one of those foreign alliances we looked at earlier. The narrowest progressive alliance of the Lib Dems, Greens, Labour and Plaid Cymru would only really have being anti-Tory to unite them. And I would say in general that defining yourself by what you're not isn't really a great winning strategy in the long run. In comparison to, say, the Turkish opposition alliance, who have not being Erdogan as their selling point, there's unity on a key issue, which is constitutional reform. That is that they want the restoration of parliamentary democracy. Now, it's not a lot, but it is at least a principle outside of not being the incumbent. What would we say is the key unifying principle of a progressive alliance? I mean, the Lib Dems are generally better on civil liberties than Keith-led Labour, the Greens and Plaid have a different position on constitutional issues to the other, Labour is weirdly susceptible to pressure in a way that means their policies constantly slide rightwards, making progressive hard to sell for the alliance, which, remember, will be containing a party that governed with the Tories less than 10 years ago. It's worth considering what such an alliance would achieve other than not being the Tories, which isn't exactly inspiring or a programme for radical improvement in the UK, which is probably the point of it, to be honest. Getting to do nothing while feeling good. I mean, it kind of rules, so I can't blame people for trying to find a way for that to happen. Perhaps the worst part of it is, it's just a shallow and opportunistic way to do politics. Think about the example of the Turkish opposition alliance again. Once parliamentary democracy is back and Erdogan is gone, big assumptions, but bear with me. What then? The alliance stretches too far to be coherent and doesn't have some big political project behind it. Similarly, think about how much of the motivation for a progressive alliance is specifically anti-Tory. What's the actual project behind it? Protecting democracy? I mean, okay, if you consider the UK a nation that had a lot of that to begin with. What then? Once the democracy button has been pressed, what does this alliance do? Bring in proportional representation? Great, that'll more or less guarantee Tory Lib Dem coalitions from now until the end of time, which is a fucking nightmare. But if you really want the main reason why it won't happen, look at the attitude they take when they're pitching their idea.
But the Lib Dems went into coalition with the Tories. Jeremy Crumblin is no longer Labour leader. Blah blah jabba jabba Tony Blair blah blah Iraq. The Lib Dems will just flounce off with the Tories. But Keith, insert politically ignorant rant here. I will always vote for party. Out of loyalty.
So, to take all of these bad points in order, 1, I'm not going to get over a party lumbering me with debt and engaging in social murder. 2, that's not the thing people care about, they care about the policies. 3, the lives of Iraqis aren't worth less than the lives of British people, who have also died because of Blair's domestic and foreign policy. 4, you can't possibly know that, and given their attitude in 2019, it's not exactly a stretch to say they'd be tempted. 5, if calling the Labour leader Keith is going to keep Labour in opposition forever, then I think it has bigger problems than the Progressive Alliance can solve. And 6, yeah, you know what, that one's the closest one to making an actual point based in reality, but people should have the right to express those political positions in a democratic system. With all of that out of the way, I guess it's time for me to wrap this up.
Concluding thoughts.
As a way of bringing this to a close, I wanted to reflect on some thoughts I had as I wrote this script but didn't really have a place for. You'll notice that there wasn't really much of a from the left in this video, as maybe I like or maybe should have delivered, but here's the thing. Think about what the Progressive Alliance as a project entails. It would mean making any electoral left policies beholden to parties that are pissed Tories, or in the hands of those who hate the left. It might be simpler and better to just admit that while we all might hate the Tories for various reasons, some better than others, our projects and objectives just aren't the same. I hope I also showed some reasoning behind the very correct view that a progressive alliance in the UK is unlikely, it wouldn't work, and is just plain bad. And if not, I guess you should tell me in the comments. And also remember to like and subscribe. I don't tell you all to like and subscribe enough, apparently. So go, do that, please. It is much appreciated. Now, there were a lot of voices in this video, and I want to thank all of those people. So almost, I'm certain, in the order that they appeared, I want to thank Tim, David from Praxis Cast, Sly, Jack from Realpolitik, Mick Wright, who also proofread, and the other proofreader, my partner, who did not lend her voice to this video, Jordan from Com Radio, Mr. Gump, Arjan from Leftover, and John, who is a loyal patron on Patreon. In fact, let me see, let's put them up here. Let's put the many new patrons up on this wall. I want to thank each and every one of you. And a particular and special shout out to Drone Riff and Mercutio. Thank you very much. If you would like your name on my one wall, or, well, I suppose it's getting a bit crowded these days, but if you would like your name on there, just subscribe on the Patreon to get your name on there. The lowest tier is £1. At £2.50 and above, you get into the Discord, and at £2.50 and above, you get to see these videos a day earlier. Otherwise, everyone, I'm aware that this video will be releasing after Christmas, but I do want to wish you all a happy Christmas. I hope it went well for you all. This will be releasing before New Year's, so I just want to say I hope 2022 is good for you. I hope you have a happy new year. I hope everyone stays safe. And with that, everyone, I'm going to bid you good day. No, I don't like that at all. But we're sticking with it, alright? Take it easy, everyone. I'll catch you next time.